Alrighty, in this video, we're going to be taking a look at the relative layout. Now, the relative layout is a lot more complicated than the linear layout that we used in the previous videos, but it's also a lot more flexible. And I highly encourage people to get a good feel for how to use it because it can lead to some massive performance improvements, which we'll be taking a look at here momentarily. Now, when we build our app, we're going to be using the relative layout in virtually all of the views. So you guys will be able to get a really good kind of overview of how to use it in practical examples as we go along. But I wanted to get it out of the way, and I wanted to set up some terminology in a quick little video about how to use it. So let's go ahead and just jump right in. I'm going to create a new Android Studio project, and I'm going to call it Views Part 3. You guys can call it whatever you want if you're following along. And then I'm going to hit Next. I'm going to go ahead and leave the compatibility the way it is, so hit Next. And then I'm going to select Blank Activity, hit Next, and then I'm going to leave this as Main Activity and hit Finish. I don't want to worry about building up my own activity in this particular video. So we're going to go ahead and let Gradle do its thing. If you guys are curious, basically all it's doing is it's pulling down all the dependencies that have been described by the Gradle build file that was automatically generated by Android Studio. So you definitely want to go ahead and make sure it's finished doing whatever it needs to do before you start playing around with the Android Studio. So as you see, it's still executing some tasks. Now Android Studio is indexing some symbols, and now it's done. Okay, so what you should see now is your layout file. If you don't, just hop over to your resource folder, your layout folder, and then your activity main.xml file. So like what we're going to be doing for pretty much all of the series, except for we're going to head back here in a second in this video, but we're going to go ahead and jump over to the text tab down here because we're going to be working with the source of our view file itself. And just for some more room, I'm going to collapse my project window. So I'll go ahead and remove this initial text view that it gives us. And do you see that we're already in a relative layout? Because it's so commonly used in most of Android's views, the Android Studio decided to automatically generate us a layout file that uses the relative layout. Now, I want you guys to ignore the relative layout at the top because we're not using that just yet. What I want to show you guys is an example of a layout created by stacking two linear layouts together to demonstrate a very common sort of design pattern in the actual sense of design, not of programming, that you will see in many applications, which is an image followed by a title and a subtitle under or next to it, stacked horizontally. So let's go ahead and accomplish this with what we know already with linear layouts. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say linear, open up a linear layout, again capital L, and hit enter so that I get my layout width. Now my layout width, I'm going to select, let's just do, this is going to be important. I want the layout width to match parent and layout height to wrap content. So the size of the linear container is only, or the linear layout is only going to be however big it needs to be to have its content. Also, this is another good example of something we haven't done yet, which is putting a view group inside of another view group. Now, because view groups are views, they can be nested inside of other view groups to accomplish more complex layouts that you might not otherwise been able to. So inside the linear layout, I'll definitely want to go ahead and give it an orientation. Now I'm going to give it an orientation of horizontal, because remember what we're doing is we have an image that's going to appear on the left, and then we'll have a title and a subtitle appearing on the right. Next up, I'm going to open up an image view. Now we haven't talked about the image view, but really the image view is pretty boring. We'll have a discussion about the different scale parameters at some point, but all in all, the image view does what it says. It presents an image. So I'm just going to type in capital IMAGE and hit enter so I get my image view. As far as the size of this particular image view, I'm going to say wrap content and wrap content, meaning this image view is going to be however big the image is that I tell it to render. So on that note, how do we get the image view to render an image? Well, there's this convenient property called source, src. So if you just type in src and hit enter, you'll get the Android prefix for you, or you can type in Android:src, whichever way. And what goes in here? Well, what goes into source is going to typically be a reference to a resource. So a resource being something that you have inside of your res folder. Now in this case, we fortunately have a thing that acts as a drawable already there, our IC launcher, which is the little Android dude which shows up in our launcher when we deploy our app. And we're going to be using that guy. So what I want to do is I want to, for the source of this image, to reference the IC launcher, MIPMAP. Again, I'm just doing this because I don't want to pull in an external image just for the sake of this example. Again, this is just an example. So I'm going to say that's how you reference resources, remember? MIPMAP, which is the type of resource, / and then IC launcher. And now by referencing that particular resource, we see on the right-hand side in our preview, a big green Android dude appeared. So now what I want to accomplish is I want a title and a subtitle to appear to the right of the Android dude. So the way that we would think of doing this without a relative layout and only using what we've seen so far is to introduce a second linear layout. So I'm going to introduce a second linear layout. So I'm going to type in li and hit enter. And for the width, I'm going to go ahead and say match parent, and for the height, I'm going to say wrap content. Then I'm going to add one more attribute to this linear layout. I'm going to say orientation vertical, because we want this to stack vertically. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and introduce one more attribute into this linear layout. I want a margin left of, let's do 16 dp, 16 device-independent pixels. So that will make this linear layout appear 16 device-independent pixels away from that image view that we have right there. Now inside of this linear layout, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in my text views, because I wanted a title and a subtitle. So I'm going to open up a tag and say text view, just typing in TEXT, then hitting enter. Again, it's really important to get used to typing like this. It'll save you a bunch of time. For the width of my text view, I'm going to say match parent, and for the height, I'm going to say wrap content. Then I'm going to give it a couple other parameters. First of all, I'm going to say text size, and I'm going to give this a text size of 26 SP. Now you can think of SP as the equivalent to DP, where DP is device-independent pixels, but it's a little bit more than that. They're scalable device-independent pixels. And the reason that's important is because SP, how an SP relates to a pixel isn't just determined by the screen density. It's also determined by the user and how big they want their text to appear. So typically speaking, unless it's incredibly important that you don't do this, which it should almost never be, you should use SP so that for your text sizes, so that the sizing, the scale factor of the end user is respected when the text is rendered. Anyway, so that's why we use 26 SP for the text size. Now for the text, I'm simply going to say main title. And so now over here, we see we have main title to the right of our image view. So that's pretty cool. Now let's go ahead and do a subtitle. So I'm going to say text view. For the width, I'm going to say match parent, and for the height, I'm going to say wrap content. Now inside of this text view, I'm going to go ahead and give it a text of subtitle, and I'm not going to change its font size on purpose so that the main title appears larger. Maybe in all addition to this, on this title text view up here, I'll give this a margin bottom of 16 device-independent pixels, just to give it some little space, room to breathe there. Or maybe 8 would be more appropriate, so there's less spacing between the two titles than there is between the image, which I think makes a little bit more sense. Values aren't particularly important. So now this is what we see. I can go ahead and hit run app. It's not particularly exciting, but we'll go ahead and do this anyway, at least to get this built and installed on the device. And so, again, if you guys are, linear layouts can be composed to do this sort of thing, and it'll work. As you see, it works. You'll also notice something interesting because of the screen density of this particular device that I'm looking at, which I'm looking at a Nexus 5 instead of a Nexus 4 on the screen, the sizing of my Android Dude changed. The reason for that is I have a different value, a different image for my launcher per screen density. And because this has a smaller screen density, the image is smaller when it renders. But it's not, either way, it's not terribly exciting. We accomplished a fairly straightforward layout that you would see in a lot of different scenarios. And you can get by with just this, but there's a big problem. And the big problem is that every single view group in particular that you add into your view hierarchy being, well, the hierarchy of your views. We can look at it in our design. Here's our, oh, they call it a component tree. Okay, that's a weird change of terminology, but that's okay. But this is our view hierarchy. We start with a device, we go into our relative layout, we go into a linear layout, we go to another linear layout, then we go into our text view. That's our hierarchy. Now, like I said, every single view, but especially every single view group, adds an additional level of computation required for Android to render it to the screen. That should make sense. The more stuff we have in our view hierarchy, the more computation has to take place in order to position all of our elements. Now, you might not think this is a very big deal for what we're looking at right now, and in reality, it isn't. For these sort of things, it's not a big deal that we're using a linear layout nested inside of a linear layout. It's still not very elegant, nor flexible, which we'll see very shortly here, but ultimately it's not particularly bad. However, imagine this particular view hierarchy, starting with the topmost linear layout, was nested in a list view, where every single item in that list view has this particular hierarchy. Now, depending on how big or small our screen is, depending on how many items we can fit on the screen at the same time, we're repeating this exact same inefficient hierarchy over and over and over again multiple times. In fact, we should be able to see warnings about this. I do believe it's when it warns you, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't detect this pattern that we have here. Because this pattern that we're looking at is so common that sometimes it'll tell you, you should use a relative layout instead. Which is why we're here. We're here to talk about how awesome relative layouts are. So, yeah, that's the first example. Let's go ahead and nuke this entire linear layout and see instead how to do it with a relative layout. So I'm going to go ahead and this entire linear layout, I'm going to select this and I'm going to delete it. And we're going to rewrite it using a relative layout. Now, what's really nice is the Android Studio decided to give us a relative layout as the root of our view. Anyway, because it's so commonly used, they decided to have that be the default root view group, which we see right here, or default root view. The root element, by the way, does not have to be a view group. If you literally just wanted to display one image or at the top left corner or whatever, you could replace this with an image view if you wanted to. But regardless, we have a relative layout to work with, meaning we can now code our layout using this parent relative layout. So let's go ahead and start. Now the first thing we want to do is I'm going to say image view, and I'm going to say wrap content, just like what we did before. The image view itself is not going to change. Then we're going to say source, and then I'm going to say mitmap and IC launcher. Now, remember back when I said the image view is not going to change? Well, I actually lied. There's one more thing we need to do. And to do this thing, or the thing we need to do, will become apparent once I explain how relative layouts work. Now, relative layout is all about being able to position elements or views relative to each other. Which, I mean, it's very well named view group, honestly. And it does so by giving you the ability to tell an element that it should align itself in some direction relative to another element. Now, how would we do that? So, for example, if I wanted to say, let's make a text view and let's make it to the left of this image, or to the right of this image, rather, how would I reference this image view? Well, not surprisingly, we use IDs for that. Just like how we use IDs to reference views from our Java code, we use IDs in relative layouts to reference other views. That means, in order to do this example, I'm going to have to give this image view an ID. Let's go ahead and type in ID and hit enter. And then I'm going to say @+ID/. Now get used to that. Just memorize this, @+ID/, because you're going to be typing that a lot when working with Android. In fact, I think there's a... Yeah, we can just hit the down arrow and hit enter. Or do that if you're lazy, I guess. which you should be because you're a programmer. Anyway, so now what we have to do is we have to actually give this image view a name. And the name I'm going to give it is activity_main_image. So activity main_image, and that's again coming back to the scheme that I use for naming things in Android views. Okay, so let's go ahead and make our text view now. So I'm going to say text view. For the width, I'm going to say match parent, and for the height, I'm going to say wrap content. For the text, I'm going to say main title. Now for the font size, or text size, sorry, I'm going to say 26 SP. And now we see some problems here. This obviously doesn't look quite right. Basically, on a left to right device, a device configured for left to right rendering, what's going to happen is the image view and the text view are going to overlap each other because we haven't specified any additional layout parameters to tell the relative layout to do anything different. So they're just going to overlap each other. And another interesting thing to note, you'll notice that they overlap each other based on where they appear inside the view hierarchy. Meaning, if this text view appeared before... didn't mean to do that. If this text view appeared before the image view, notice how the image is now in front of the text view. That's just a quick aside there, but that is deterministic behavior. So if you are ever intending to overlap a view with another view, make sure the view that you want on top is defined last in your view, no matter what kind of layout groups you're using. Anyway, so now the question is, how do I get main title to the right of that image view? Well, really not surprisingly, it is going to be layout to right of inner, and then we have to specify an ID resource. Okay, so a couple of things I need to talk about in a second, like where did this layout to right of even come from, blah, blah, blah. I do want to point out another really quick tip that'll save you a whole lot of time, and that is how this autocomplete menu works, and it works very simply. I can just type in main image, for example, and notice how it completes the beginning, the ID, the at ID / activity underscore. So it'll save you a lot of time if you just don't even worry about typing in at ID / and then the prefix for the activity. Just type in, even if I type in main, it comes up. So go ahead and do that, hit enter, and now look what happened. Now you see layout to right of, it is now to the right of that thing. So where did this come from? So this layout to right of. Now, again, this is a layout parameter. Just how layout gravity was the layout parameter of the linear layout, layout to right of is a layout parameter of the relative layout, meaning it only makes sense when we have it specified in a view that appears as an immediate child of the relative layout. So if I had a nested linear layout, for example, I would not have access to layout to right of because that text view would then be owned by the linear layout. But because this text view is owned by a relative layout, we have access to that attribute. And then again, this attribute doesn't tell the text view anything. This attribute is passed to the text view, but it isn't used by the text view to do anything. It is additional metadata that is accessed by the relative layout, so the relative layout knows how to position its children. So, what exactly does layout to right of do? Well, layout to right of, well, it positions it to the right of the specified element, but in more formal terms. Now, me describing this in more formal terms will make more sense as we continue on with this video, but in formal terms, what's happening is the left side of this box, the left side of this view, gets aligned to the right side of this view. So the left side of this gets aligned to the right side of this. Anyway, now you'll notice that there is going to be a slight problem. There's no margin. So how do we specify margin? Well, there's two ways. I can give the image view a margin right of 16 dp, and you notice that the relative layout respects the margin right of the image, pushing the title away. Or I'll give the text view a margin left of 16 dp. Both accomplish the same thing. For the purpose of this demonstration, however, I'm going to stay with this example. I'm going to have the text view have a margin left of 16 dp instead of the image view having a margin right of 16 dp. You'll see why in a moment here. But anyway, that is the most basic way to use a relative layout, positioning our things to the left of or to the right of or above or below a particular element. In fact, if I hit enter here and I open up my autocomplete, I can do layout underscore and I can see all of the additional parameters that I can now specify because this view is a child, an immediate child of the relative layout. So we have our margin stuff, and we already know we use that all the time anyway. That's irrelevant. But the other stuff, like to left of, to right of, align start or align right, align parent top, blah blah blah. There's also like a center horizontally, center in parent, center vertically, and all that fun stuff. So you can go and for all that stuff, it's pretty self-evident. We're pretty much just going to cover an example of one of those things each as we go along. So let's go ahead and do our subtitle. How are we going to do that? So I'm typing a text view, and I'm going to give it a width of match parent and a height of wrap content and a text of subtitle. And now, as you see, it appears at the top left because we haven't told it to go anywhere else. So what would I do in this case? Well, I want to position this view relative to my title view. So in order to do that, I'm going to have to give my title view an ID. So let's go ahead and do that. So on the main title, by the way, if you ever get confused about where your layouts are or where your particular views are, it's a really handy feature of this preview window just to be able to click on the view. And now notice that my keyboard cursor is now selecting text view. Anyway, let's give it an ID. So I'm going to say ID plus / blah 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 activity main title. Now for this text view, what am I going to do? Well, we want it to appear below the main title. So let's go ahead and say below. I'm just going to type in the word below, and the autocomplete window pops up and says Android : layout underscore below. I'm going to hit enter, and then I'm just going to type in main title. And then hit enter, and that'll autocomplete the layout below. Now that really isn't what we're looking for here, because you see it's not respecting the image. So you might think, well, let's just do what we did with the main title. Let's say to right of, again, I'm just typing in to right of and hitting enter, and the rest comes up there. To right of image, activity main image. Well, we have a problem here. So this is the reason why I wanted to do the margin on the title instead of the image, because as you see right here, our title and our subtitle aren't aligned properly. Because the title has that margin, the subtitle doesn't. So what's the answer to this? We could certainly re-hardcode back in the margin on the subtitle and say a margin left of 16 device-independent pixels. But a better solution in this particular case is to not do that, to prevent us from having to repeat that number a bunch of times. Another solution, instead of saying to right of, let's do kind of the opposite of to right of. It's align left. So if I say align left and then I say main title, look what happens. Now remember when I said the interesting thing is when we do the to right of, above, below, or to left of, that's aligning the left to the right of the other thing? Well, the align left, align top, align bottom, and align right, what those do is those align that axis with the corresponding axis of the element that we specified. So this is bringing all the way the right side, or the left side of the subtitle, all the way to the left side of the main title. And now to complete this example, I can come here onto my main title, and I'm going to say margin bottom 8 dp. And now we have a layout that is identical to what we had before. So a couple other interesting things to note. You note that I do have match parent as the layout width for these text views, but you'll notice they're not matching the parent. That's because the way the relative layout works, whatever element it's aligned to takes precedence over the fact we told it to match parent in the width, and the same is true for the height. So in this particular example, the width is less than the parent because we've aligned it to the right of another object. Anyway, yeah, so that is the relative layout, at least the most basic examples of using the relative layout. If we go back into the design view, look at our view hierarchy. Now, all we have is our device, our parent relative layout, and then 3 elements inside of it, thus flattening our hierarchy and making it more efficient, especially if this particular view was repeated multiple times due to it being put into a list view. So if we come back here to the text view, there's something I want to point out. So I've been talking about left, right, top, bottom a lot, and I've been failing to mention the existence of end and start, which in reality is what we should be using. The reason we're not using that is because this app, when I created it, targeted Android 4.1 and not 4.2. In Android 4.2, a lot of this view stuff, where we talk about the start or the left or the right of something, such as margin left, margin right, to left of, to right of, a lot of that stuff was replaced with end and start. So instead of to right of right here, we would say to end of. Right? And then we get an error. We get an error because it was Android 4.2 that introduced this, not 4.1. Now, in the future, I won't make the mistake of accidentally creating an Android application that targets 4.1. We're going to be targeting 4.2 and above for our application, so we'll be able to use the appropriate to end of instead of to right of. But what's the difference? That's actually probably a good thing to point out. The difference is that end means the end of something, right means physically to the right. The difference comes into play when we talk about left to right versus right to left languages. So some languages like Arabic, for example, read right to left. So the text is aligned all the way to the right-hand side of the page, and you read right to left. Whereas in other languages, most Western languages, to my knowledge, are left to right, meaning the stuff is aligned to the left, you look at the left of the page, and you read to the right. End means wherever something should logically end, taking into account whether the language that the current locale is set in is left to right or right to left. So if right here, if I kept it to right of, and everything like this, what would happen is in a Western language that reads left to right, this would display as it is. And in a language that reads right to left, it would also display as it is. There would be no difference because we're using to right of or align left. But if I switch this to end of and margin start and align start, if I changed all those, now would be the difference. Well, difference would be in a Western locale, it would still look how it looks on the screen. But in a right to left locale, all of these things would be flipped. This would start over here, this image would be on the right, and then these would be aligned to the right of the image. So if you want to be able to handle right to left languages, which you should be cognizant of as you write your applications, then you should always use to end of instead of to left of. Now what's funny is here, you'll notice that when I have left and right, it gives me a warning about it, right? It says, consider adding layout to end of instead of to better support right to left layouts. But then when I change it to end of, it gives me an error. It's like, yeah, do this thing, but don't do this thing. The reason I'm getting an error again is because I set the compatibility to Android 4.1 instead of 4.2, which 4.2 is what introduced this new way of doing things. So yeah, well, that's just in your mind, just equate end to right, start to left. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and finish this video with one more example, an interesting example that we're going to be coming across when we build the app, but I think it'll let us talk about a couple more layout parameters that are available to us with the relative layout. What I want to have happen is I want there to be two buttons at the bottom of this view. I want there to be two equally widthed buttons. Now, one way that we can do this is by introducing a linear layout. So I'm going to say linear layout, width of match parent, height of wrap content, I'm going to give the linear layout an orientation of horizontal. Then I'm going to create two buttons inside of it. I'm going to say button 1 is going to be, the width is going to be match parent, height is going to be wrap content, weight is going to be 1, and then the text is going to be okay, and then I'll have another button with a width of match parent, wrap content, weight of 1, and text of cancel. Now if I scroll up, I see my two buttons here on my linear layout. So with the relative layout, how would I get this to the bottom of the screen? Well, I can go ahead and inside of the linear layout itself, give the linear layout a layout parameter and say layout align parent bottom true. So that will take this layout and it'll shove it all the way down to the bottom. So now we have our two buttons here at the bottom. Now, what does align parent bottom do? Well, all the align parent things are booleans. So like align parent bottom and left, right, start, and top, they're booleans, and they just specify, do we want to align the bottom of this view to the bottom of my relative layout? Now, there's a better way to do this, a way that doesn't involve introducing a linear layout. I just wanted to show you guys exactly what it is I wanted to do for this particular example, and then show you guys how we could accomplish the same thing without introducing an additional view. Now, your first instinct may to do something like this. Let's go ahead and remove our linear layout. I'll go ahead and create a button, and I'm going to give it a width of wrap content and a height of wrap content. Then I'm going to give it a text of OK. I'm going to give it an ID of ID/activity main OK button. Then I'm going to say align parent bottom true. Then I'm going to create another button with a wrap content and a wrap content in the height and the width. I'm going to give it a text of cancel. I'm going to then give it a layout align parent bottom of true. And then I'm going to say to right of OK button. Well, that doesn't quite look like what we want it to. Now you might be thinking, well, what if I give a layout width of match parent on both of the buttons? Well, that doesn't quite do what we want it to either. You notice that we're not quite getting it to be a split view between the left and the right, where each is taking up equal amounts of space. Okay, so what do we do instead now? Like, how do we accomplish this with the relative layout without introducing a linear layout? The answer is a very common technique of introducing a dummy view. Let's go ahead and do that. What I'm going to do is, up here underneath the text view, I'm going to instantiate a view. Now, not an image view, not a text view, not a button, just a view. What is a view? Well, a view is the base class to all these other views, and it doesn't do anything. It can be positioned, but it doesn't do anything. So I'm going to give it a layout width of 0, dp, and layout height of 0, dp. Then I'm going to give it an ID of ID/activity main dummy view. Now, what am I going to do with this dummy view? What I want to have happen is I want this view to be all the way down, centered horizontally in the parent and at the bottom. In fact, I don't even need to have it at the bottom. I just need to have this view centered in the parent. So I'm going to say center horizontal equals true. So what does that mean? That means this view is 0 dp by 0 dp, and it's in the center horizontally of the parent. Now, what does that let me accomplish? Well, using the relative layout, I can now position elements relative to that dummy view, even though the dummy view has no content and is 0 dp wide and 0 dp tall. So how do I do that? Well, right here with my OK button, instead of saying, or in addition to saying align parent bottom, I can say to left of dummy view and hit enter. Now check that out. Now it all works. I'm going to do one more thing here, but you'll see it does work. where we now have the OK button being split and the cancel button being split. However, in the cancel button, I don't want to say to right of OK button anymore. I would rather have a dependency on the layout position of the dummy view. So on the cancel button, I'm going to say to right of dummy view. And now we are positioned properly. And if I want some space on the OK button, I can say margin right is 8 dp. Or how about, let's do 4 dp. And then on the cancel button, I can say margin left is 4 dp. And now we have some spacing in between the two. And now if I hit run, we will have our relative layout with an OK and a cancel button. All right, so if we go ahead and hop back into the design view, we now see our view hierarchy. So all of this really cool stuff that we see is all done inside of one view group, which again makes it more performant than having multiple nested view groups inside of our layout. All right, so I think that pretty much wraps up all I wanted to say in this video. There's not a whole lot else to it. You guys are going to see a lot of examples of constructing views. In fact, the whole point of us building an app is going to be to show you guys and to really drive home how to compose views to make more complex examples. So if you're looking at this and saying, oh, well, I guess it's cool that I can do this particular thing, but I'm not sure I understand how to, do this in more complex scenarios, we will see a lot more complex scenarios. So I guess until the next video.